And we are live. Skipping the intro for today because we got a lot of theory to get through, folks. We appreciate you for tuning in, whether or not you are on YouTube or on X.com. You are watching the Barracks, your non Euclidean network, news, theory, policy for a multipolar world. This is Teray, whose Wi Fi is cutting in and out. So I apologize if it is a bit choppy for today. On my left, you know him, you love him. He's the ghost with the most. Your friendly neighborhood milkman. How you doing, Milk?
I'm doing all right. We're doing meat and potatoes today. As much
Just
as I love talking shit about internet personalities, that's not at the end of the day, we're here for the important stuff, right?
yeah, and doesn't get more important than having an auto workers strike in terms of Marxist content. As we were saying behind the scenes before we started the stream, this strike pretty much fell into our laps at an opportune time. Any opportunity that Marxists can have to apply our theory to what's going on, to represent the people in the UAW union, will only give more leverage to the American working class. Hello, Mason, the good boy. How you doing today? So, Milkman, you want to get into it?
Yeah, well, I wanted to give a little intro just because this is the stuff that I really take seriously because the reason I get asked a lot, like, why do you have to call yourself a Marxist? Like, why, all the Marxists are like these cringe, transgender, gender fluid people. That's what people associate it with. Why do you have to call yourself a Marxist? And the reason is because it's true, because I believe Marxism is true. So no matter how much it gets distorted, no matter how much people are out here, opportunists trying to twist Marxism to their anal morality, I'm still going to call myself a Marxist because I'm not going to lie to people, because this is what is true. So I can get a little autobiographical for a moment. When I was a young milkman, I got into actually a pretty prestigious school.
When you were a milk boy.
When I was a milk boy, I got into a pretty prestigious school, and I totally bought into all the ideology around it. I thought, like, this is the sacred bastion of knowledge, and I'm one of the chosen few. I'm going to Hogwarts and all that. And I got there, and I was majoring in economics, and it was a bunch of bullshit, like, to put it simply. And I wasn't the only one who thought that. A lot of people thought it was pretty much bullshit, but they thought, like, well, you just got to do the bullshit, and then you graduate and you get a job at Goldman Sachs and you're rich. But it kind of shattered my worldview, because it's like, this is the place where smart people go, where they teach you smart people things, and they're filling my ears with a bunch of bullshit. Eventually I dropped it. I changed my major, but that's for another time. Anyway, eventually I discovered Marx. And it was just such a breath of fresh air after all this bullshit that, like, this shit's actually making sense. And it's such a pet peeve of mine when, like, these libertarians come out and say, oh, you guys don't understand basic economics. They say that all the time. Socialists just don't understand basic economics. And that's projection, because they don't understand basic economics, quote unquote. Because to understand it is to reject it. Okay? Because on the surface, it seems like, oh, there's like graphs and equations, and like, it's all, these people know what they're talking about. But the number of, like, completely fucking absurd assumptions that are swimming just beneath the surface, and we'll get into it as we get into this essay by Marx, Value, Price, and Profit, is crazy. And it's not that hard to see. So what we're doing today, Value, Price, and Profit, this is a lecture that Marx gave while he was writing Capital. And he summarizes basically his general theory of capital. But what it is it's a response to this bourgeois economist, who we call Citizen Weston, who is making this argument right here in this political comic that I just came across my feed today. And this is why theory is so important, guys. This is why, like, if you treat Marxism as an edgy brand, or if you treat him as like a Dumbledore at gay Hogwarts, that's not going anywhere, because what he really is he was right. And this is the real economics. This is how shit really works. And meanwhile, the bourgeois economists are making the same exact arguments they made 150 years ago. So what Citizen Weston says that Marx is responding to is this right here. He says, well, if the workers are going to demand higher wages, then it won't matter, because the prices are just going to increase in response. And this was in the 19th century. And lo and behold, here we are today, same exact argument. I'm actually going to go ahead and make the claim that every like big conservative and libertarian argument against Marxian economics today was addressed at some point by Marx. I'm going to make that claim. I think that's true. I don't think they've updated. I mean, except like the 100 million bullshit, I guess. But like against the economic stuff, against like the labor theory of value, it was all addressed by Marx. And these people are completely projecting when they say you don't understand basic economics. They don't understand it. The reason they believe it is because they have a stiffy for authority, and all the authority figures are saying it's true. And that's it. Because as we're going to get into, this seems like this guy, he's not making an argument. This is just straight up propaganda. And the reason people are thinking this is true, like, oh, well, they're paying them $20, so the burger will cost $75. It's always burgers, by the way. Is because he's just standing on the shoulders of midgets from 100 years ago who were making this argument. And it's just been hammered so much into people's heads, this supply and demand shit, that this is the extent of economics, is it's just all about consumers and producers, that he can just say with no backup, oh, well, you pay the workers more, the commodities are going to cost more. And that's all this is saying. And people are like, oh, well, that's, I mean, how many likes does this have? So, if we scroll down a bit, let's see. Oh, not that many likes. Okay, so, never mind. But still, you hear this argument all the time. Every time workers go on strike, you hear this shit, because according to quote unquote basic economics, everything is at equilibrium. And if there's any disturbance to equilibrium, like a union demanding higher wages, this messes up the equilibrium, results in dead weight loss, which is because there's no class here. It's all about consumers and producers. So the production and consumption is not being efficient, and it's called dead weight loss. And I mean, it's just right off the bat, a profoundly conservative way of looking at the world, that we're starting at equilibrium, and any change is breaking that equilibrium. But anyway, Marx does it better than me. So let's get into value, price, and profit, and we'll see how Marx would have argued against this meme, which is...
All right. Yeah, so before we take down this image, we want everyone watching the video to understand that, like Milkman said, the basic argument being fought against is represented in this picture 150 years after Marx gave this lecture. To this day, bourgeois economists will say that the price of a commodity is determined by wage labor, by the price of labor, which is the wage. If you increase the wage, you increase the price of the commodity. This argument has been made, was being made all the way back in Marx's time, and he has disproven this, and it has been disproven by historical material fact, even after Marx died. Specifically, with the United Auto Workers strike going on and 600 laborers being fired at a Ford plant, it's very convenient that the Ford Motor Company also offers us many historical examples of this argument being made in this image here, disproven flat out. So we'll take this down. Would you mind stopping the screen share? And how this is going to work. There are 14 sections to this essay. It's not a very long essay. You can get through it in 2 hours. We highly recommend you read it, because as the United Auto Workers strike continues to go on, and we do believe it's going to go on, because we have reached a turning point of the struggle between labor and private industry in this country. Understanding how to combat these lies that are going to be pushed in front of you more and more as the strike goes on, how to combat these lies will be imperative. So we're going to break it down section by section for this essay. Starting with the very beginning section, production and wages. And I have my handy notebook here just so we can break down the gist of each particular section. And in production and wages of the essay, Marx just breaking down essentially that this part of the lie that an increase in wages equals an increase in the price of commodities. Part of the lie is that wages and production are fixed. So for the hamburger example, the bourgeois economist will say that the number of hamburgers that McDonald's produces every single day is a fixed number. And if it does increase, it increases linearly according to this linear plan. It's the same with automotive industries, like that a factory has a quota that they're looking to fill, and so production is fixed. And Marx is laying out that it is variable. And this is intuitive. A lot of this stuff is very intuitive, especially in after the 20th century, where we gained a lot of experience with industrial labor making America into the superpower that it became. That we can arbitrarily just decide to increase production. And this was true for Ford Motor Company. He just decided to increase production exponentially when all of his capitalist contemporaries were saying that you should put a cap on production and have scarcity of the commodities you're trying to supply. But this is just, again, it's an arbitrary decision to increase just as much as it is to decrease. It's an elastic number, that limit of how much you can produce in this country. And so saying that demanding more money for a fixed supply of product that you're making, whether it's hamburgers or cars, this is a fallacy, because we can always increase the number of cars easily increase the number of cars or hamburgers or clothes that we're making in order to counteract the cost of labor.
Yeah, one thing he points out, which is very true today with this basic economics, is that when the capitalists are acting in their interests, well, this is just like a law of nature, like gravity. And you can't argue with that, because that's just how it is. But then when the workers start acting in their interest, that's like some foreign influence that results in deadweight loss. So he writes, if the capitalist pleases to feed you on potatoes instead of upon meat, and upon oats instead of upon wheat, you must accept his will as a law of political economy and submit to it. Yeah, I'm pulling it right here. This is so true today. This is how bourgeois economics operates. If when wages go down due to inflation, I mean, they pretty much explicitly say, like, yeah, inflation just happens. It's like gravity or the tides. It just happens. And inflation is a reduction in wages. And then when the workers unionize, like right now at the United Autoworkers strike, and ask for higher wages, which they're not really asking for higher wages, but he gets into that later. That's like a monkey wrench into the machine, right? And that's going to cause problems. And so he says, it's not just about the will. That's kind of a cop-out. They say, well, it's just capitalists are doing what they want to do. But what they all want to do is make as much as possible, right? So every capitalist wants to maximize profit. So really there's underlying laws here, which he says he wants to inquire into his power, the limits of that power, and the character of those limits, which is the kind of thing the bourgeois economists do not like to talk about.
Right? We might as well spoil the ending for this particular essay, just so we can keep it in mind as we go on. Like Marx concludes, like at the very end, that the profit of selling your commodities on a market is determined the hard limits. If you had to have hard economic limits, which these other like charlatan economists want to avoid because they don't want to point to how exploitative the system is, the hard limits, two of them that define profits, are the absolute minimum wage, the absolute smallest number you can pay a worker to subsist, to keep them just barely alive, hanging on by a thread. That's the first limit. The second limit is the maximum limit of the working day. How close to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, can you have workers working in these jobs? Those are the two maximum limits that define profits. And therefore, yeah, the capitalist is going to want to have you working as long as possible for as little as possible. Labor wants to work as little as possible for as short as possible. And why shouldn't we? We produce everything in this country.
Right. I mean, it's straightforward. It's self-interest.
Yeah. So that's the we're gonna spoil the ending there. So keep that in mind for all of these different tactics that capital will try to use in their favor. Because the last conclusion that Marx makes is that unions, such as in the modern day, the United Auto Workers Union, are very important for resisting the advances of capital to exploit us. They're sort of like the guerrilla warriors against these like guerrilla warriors in this class warfare, but they have a limited effect in changing that fundamental relationship, that antagonistic relationship we have with private industry.
All right, let's go on to the next section. So he destroys this argument actually pretty quickly, and then sort of just starts talking about what he's been writing about in Capital. So let's go over this argument. So first of all, this is also a big problem with bourgeois economics, is that he says, like, they just assume that the way things are now is like the way they're supposed to be. So Marx says, let's say they're paying 4 shillings and the workers are asking for 5 shillings. Well, but why is it fixed at 4 shillings worth of commodities? Why not at 3 or 2 or any other sum? If the limit of the amount of wages is settled by an economical law, independent of the will of the capitalist and the will of the working man, the first thing Citizen Weston has to do is state that law and prove it. So why are wages what they are now? Like, why are the auto workers getting paid what they are now? They're asking for more, but why are we like assuming that what they're getting paid now is like the right amount? It's just sort of this inherent conservatism in bourgeois economics, like the way things, because that's what bourgeois economics is. It's all set up to say the status quo is good, and the way things are going right now with the bourgeoisie on top, it's the best of all possible worlds, right? Like Pangloss from Candide. That's pretty much what they're doing. So yeah. Oh, this is great. So this is what they always do too. Bourgeois economists always live in this world of abstraction and widgets and bullshit parables and stuff. So the way he illustrates it is not with any real world examples, but he says, well, if you have a bowl with a certain quantity of soup to be increased by a certain number of persons, an increase of the broadness of spoons would produce no increase in the amount of soup. He must allow me to find this illustration rather spoony. All right, that probably works better in German. But this is how they always do it. They always come up with some cute little metaphor like, oh, we have a bowl of soup. And but what they'll never do is use like real world examples, because like today with this burger example, you could look at other countries like in Europe where the fast food workers get paid a lot more and have benefits and stuff, and the burgers don't cost more. So that disproves it like right off the bat. They always go into the real world instead of the world of widgets. Destroys this shit. But what he says is, what he's really saying is this bowl of soup is the entire production of the national economy. And to say that like they're going to exhaust that is just completely ridiculous. I mean, that's what I mean by like these underlying assumptions that you don't see. Like, yeah, if we increase wages by 1 shilling, it's going to exhaust the entire national economy. Like, yeah, sure. because right now it's being exhausted by the profits of the capitalist, of course. So anyway, that's his next argument. Or maybe not his next one.
Yeah, so just to go back for a second, that was one of the uh, conclusions from the beginning of this essay was that one of the means of flexibility for this rate of production and therefore the rate of profit is the ratio that exists between wages and the capital given to the owner of, like, say, a factory. So even if production was fixed, even if the amount of soup in the bowl was fixed, even if the number of burgers being produced at McDonald's was fixed, you can still have a variable relationship between how much you afford to give a laborer and how much you afford to give the owner of a factory, which, as even CNN, the mouthpiece for the Democratic Party, for fascist Biden, is admitting that the current ratio at one of these automotive plants today is that a CEO used to make 50 years ago. A CEO was making 20 times the rate of pay for an entry level worker, which to our minds seems fair. This person is running a national company and they have a lot of responsibility. So it seems like, oh, that's a lot of money. I aspire to be that. It seems fair. Whatever, that's subjective. However, whatever you feel the number should be. Today, that ratio is almost 400 times the amount of what an entry level employee makes in wages. It's something like 360. And again, if you can arbitrarily increase that ratio such that the owner of one of these automotive plants makes 360 times the amount of an entry-level employee, then you can decrease the ratio just as arbitrarily so that you bring it back to 20 or even lower.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, that's what they're saying on the shop floor, right? They're saying that, oh, well, the bosses are making shitloads of profits. Why don't they share it with us? And that's really essentially what Marx is saying too, but it's like the bell curve meme, right? And what you've got in the middle are these fucking midwit bourgeois economists who, what they do is they obfuscate while they simplify. They obfuscate so that you don't recognize how absurd their simplifications are.
To be clear, before we move it on to wages and currency, I will say that I want to bring that up because that relationship, that ratio between wages and capital owned and private capital is what these charlatans will bring up is like, oh, you just want to redistribute. Well, you just want to redistribute. No, we don't. I don't care. I don't. Fine, keep it at 400. 400 times the rate that an entry level. Whatever. Fine. Doesn't matter. We could still be increasing the amount of factories opened, the amount of productive jobs that we have in this country, like manufacturing jobs, to increase how many cars are being produced at Ford motor plants. And that would have a similar effect of being able to increase the amount of productivity, the amount of value that labor has. And therefore, you can arbitrarily decide to just increase the amount that an automotive factory worker makes based on how much he produces. So you don't even need to redistribute that ratio at all. You just need to increase the number. You just need to make the decision that we're going to start making more cars in this country. And why shouldn't we?
Before we move on, I want to address this argument Marx makes, which is a beautiful argument and really exemplifies a lot of the problems I've been laying out about bourgeois economics, which is, he says, okay, so Citizen Weston says, if you increase wages, demand for commodities will go up because the workers are going to have more money to spend on commodities, and the prices will go up. We having soup today. Yeah, we are. We're having soup with big spoons. And anyway, if and demand will go up because the workers have more money, and the prices will go up to correspond, and the wages will disappear into these increased prices. So what Marx says here, so that's basic economics, right? Now here's Marxian economics. So when you raise the wages for workers, they're not going to go out and buy like Rolexes and yachts, right? They're going to buy necessities. They're going to buy food and clothes and, shit for their kids. They're not going to buy what the bourgeoisie buys, which he claims necessities are 1/5 or 1/7 of the population. Let me tell you something. It's way lower today. Most of our economy is luxuries, like in terms of like dollar amount. You would not believe some of these fucking businesses out there that cater just to the ultra wealthy and are like wildly successful businesses, just selling them like ridiculous shit. So yeah, if you increase, if the working class has more money, they're going to go out and buy necessities. They're going to raise the price of necessities, and then to compensate, the price of luxuries would decrease. The rate of profit for luxuries is going to fall. Okay, so it's really just a shift in the economy from focusing on the ridiculous extravagance of the elite to focusing on like the meat and potatoes of the working class. That's what would happen. But what this obfuscation and simplification that bourgeois economics does, they say, oh, well, the price of commodities is going up. And like I said at the beginning, swimming under the surface are all these absurd fucking assumptions. And one of those assumptions, which you need Marx to point out because they're not making it clear for you, is that they are saying when they make this argument that if you increase the wages of workers, you're going to increase the price of like fucking Rolexes and ponies and shit and private jets. Like, that's ridiculous. But because they simplify it while obfuscating it, it doesn't see it makes sense, right? Oh, well, prices are going to go up and commodities are going to go up. Yeah, some commodities. But there are commodities that the working class will never buy, which actually make up a huge portion of the economy because they're so much more expensive. And also, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the businesses out there that cater to rich people. Anyway, we can move on to the next. He lays out this whole argument here.
And then real quick, and just to dispel the last fixed argument that inflation will go up. That's ultimately what they're saying, is that this is an inflationary thing, that increasing wages will increase inflation. That's essentially what the argument is. The last method of trying to make that point is that if you increase wages, you have to increase the amount of currency which is supplied, like the amount of money.
Well, that's a later section, I think. That's a later section.
Section 2. Yeah. So it just
Do you talk about that here? The currency?
So it's it's part one is production and wages, part 2 is wages and currency, and then part 3 is supply and demand.
Oh, okay. Well, let me see if I can find that real quick.
I mean, wages and currency is pretty self-explanatory because it's so there it is, wages and currency.
Oh, we're moving on to section 3. Okay. Well, the other thing is he brings up some real world examples, which again, the bourgeois economists hate real world examples, but he brings in the real world examples. That's the easiest way to blow bourgeois economists out of the fucking water. Just bring up the real world examples because it never works out how they say it does, ever. The dismal science, they call it. The dismal science, because they're always wrong about everything. Well, maybe it's not a fucking science then, huh? Have you thought of that?
Yeah. All right. Wages and currency we don't have to spend too much time on, because now that we know that the supply of production is not fixed, then we can also apply this to the supply of currency as an inflationary reality. Yeah, we know this. We have direct experience with this. When you turn on the money printer, money becomes less valuable, and you have to spend more of it to get the same amount of stuff. You have to work more to get the same amount of stuff you could last year. And these economists are saying that if you increase wages, you have to increase the amount of money being printed to supply those wages. This is a lie, because if production is elastic, then circulation of currency is also elastic. It's surprising how many of these points are intuitive at this point, having so much experience with technological advancement and with labor in this country. But the circulation of currency, if you just increase how much, how fast a dollar goes around the economy, how much when it's given out to a company by the bank, and when that company pays you, the employee, and the employee puts it either back into a bank account or just spends it at a business for donuts or something, and that business puts it in the bank, and then it completes that circulation. You just increase increase the circulation speed that dollar goes through, so that you don't have to increase the supply of money because it comes back around to the bank faster.
Right. Working people don't sit on money like the bourgeoisie does. They spend
also,
it.
we don't spend money in gold coins.
Well, that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to say about currency, is because this is the one area where, and this is really one of the reasons I became like I started listening to Haas, was because when I first read this stuff, it was very obvious that when he's talking about money and his theory of like why money's value, it doesn't apply to today, because for Marx, and at the time, if they want to print more money, they have to go dig up gold or silver to back it, right? So this is the crystallized labor, which we'll get into that in a minute. He starts talking about labor theory of value, but there's crystallized labor in every dollar, which is represented by the labor it took to dig the gold out of the mine. But that's not how it works today, right? Because it's, and you could just say, oh, well, now it's backed by oil, but it's not, because, it's not like banks have gallons of oil in their vaults that you can go and exchange for money. The oil that backs the dollar today is in the ground. And what it's really backed by is the American military, right? Because if you say, like Gaddafi did or like Saddam did, that we're going to start selling oil in a different currency, they'll come fucking kill you. That's really what backs the dollar, is the strength of the American military. So it's a very different system of money we have today. And of course, they can just print it. They can print as much as they want, right?
And it's always arbitrary. Yeah, the decision that's essentially
they're made at the Fed by bureaucrats. It's a planned economy. So this is when Haas says we live in socialism, I love that, because it blows leftist minds and they hate it. But how do you argue against it? Because this is not how our money works, and this is the one place where we really need to go beyond Marx, and we need to use his method of analysis on our own system of money rather than just copy paste, which is what fucking leftists do, and say, oh, because it's clearly not how money works anymore, And Marx would be very unhappy if he knew that people 150 years later were saying, oh, well, that's what he wrote, so it must be right, when it's been 150 years. And this is not how our money works. They don't have to dig up shit to print money.
Yeah,
money printer go burr. They just do it.
The man could not have anticipated the rise of fintech firms. So we don't have to spend too much time on that section. The next one, which I found very supply and demand. This one I found very helpful, because that's we hear it all the time. Like, supply and demand is a better theory of value than the labor theory of value. Yep. But he breaks it down very clearly that of how limiting is not. Well, rather, the supply and demand as a theory of value is not just limiting; it does not offer any explanation about like the supply and demand theory of value. It has nothing. It doesn't answer the question: where does value come from? And that's a pretty major flaw in your theory if it doesn't have an answer to the question of where does value come from. Specifically, where obviously supply and demand are these countering forces. One negates the other. If you increase supply, that lowers, and you increase supply, that lowers demand. If you increase demand, that lowers supply because you're consuming more of the supply. These two things are zero sum. And theoretically, you can achieve a balance between supply and demand such that they reach an equilibrium. And what these economists fail to explain is, if you reach an equilibrium, you have now reached the realized price of a commodity, say of the cars, being that that a labor strike will increase will decrease the supply of cars, and that'll increase demand and drive up the price. That may eventually, when you reach an equilibrium, a realized price, these economists cannot explain to you how that number is
Yep.
reached.
It sounds ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous. Like, how do people take it seriously when you can't like? But it's true. Like, bourgeois economics cannot explain why a Rolls Royce costs more than a bike. They can't do it because they say, "Oh, well, it's just whatever people want to pay for it." But like, if I go to a dealership and they have a Rolls Royce and a bike, and I just want to buy one, the Rolls Royce is obviously going to cost more than a bike. But according to bourgeois economics, so this quote is great. Destruction of bourgeois economics in one line. He will be unable to tell me why a certain amount of money is given for a certain amount of labor. If he should answer me, this was settled by the law of supply and demand, which is what they say. This is what their replacement for the labor theory of value is. Well, people pay what they want to pay. Pure idealism, by the way. We just come up in our minds with what price we think is correct, and then as gods, we inflict this idea we have of the price upon reality, and it conforms to our will. But of course, I should ask him in the first instance by what law supply and demand are themselves regulated, and such an answer would at once put him out of court. This is still true today. This is still true. They still do this shit where it's just about supply and demand. But like, if you just go one layer deeper and ask, well, why are this, like, what's governing the supply and demand? Well, we can't do that, right? It's the obfuscated simplification. They use all these dumbass graphs and this unnecessary equations and
or
shit, and
retail
they can't
psychology.
answer. But then at the same time, they can't answer these most basic questions, like, why does a Rolls Royce cost more than a bike? Well, obviously, because the Rolls Royce requires more labor than the bike. But they're not allowed to say that because they have to reject the labor theory of value.
Right. My favorite is to explain supply and demand is through like retail psychology, which is irrational. Like, oh yeah, the market is an irrational system, and then they'll just move on without. And I want to grill them for a second and be like, so you honestly, you're going to look me in the eye and say that the forces of development in the country of raising life expectancy should be in the blind hands of an irrational system? Is that what you think the best way of doing things is? That sounds awful.
And the other thing is, if that's true, if price is just what we decide it is, why doesn't that apply to labor? Why can't these workers in the UAW say, well, this is what we think the price of our labor should be? But no, that's a problem, right? That's deadweight loss. Yeah, it's completely inconsistent. It's completely ridiculous.
Which brings us to the next.
This is the basic economics that libertarians are telling you to learn,
right? And which brings us to the next basic fallacy that is addressed, and which brings us. We're getting closer and closer to this labor theory of value. But first, we have to knock off all of these fallacies. This one to go over briefly is that it's a tautology, like this linear, just A equals B, like this linear thinking. I know, right? Like flat thinking of that the value of commodities being sold determines the value of labor. So like the price of a car being made at this Ford factory determines determines the price of the wage of the of the factory worker, which if we sell saying if we sell a car for this particular price, then we should pay you this particular amount of money. That price is determined is going back to that argument. Price is determined by wage. If you want to increase the wage, you need to increase the price of the commodity. But again, avoiding avoiding that question. Where does the price of the wage come from? Where does the price of of these things come from? Because when you boil down this argument, what they're saying is value equals value. That which is circular. That's a flat circle.
This is why they can't explain why a Rolls Royce costs more. He lays it out here because the supply and demand can explain fluctuations, but around equilibrium, but they can't explain why equilibrium is what it is. Like if you take it one layer deeper, why does the equilibrium settle on this one price? They got nothing. It's because they can't, because the answer is because it requires more labor, and they're not allowed to say that because they have to reject the labor theory of value, because that gives workers way too much power, or it makes workers realize how much power they have,
Right.
which is all of it, all of the power, and that's a no-no. You gotta keep the workers ignorant of how powerful they actually are.
Yeah. So
That's
just to
one thing. If I can go on a tangent for a moment, the way
short
all
one,
these
short one.
the way all these leftists are treating Marx as like this slave morality, like the most oppressed, the meek shall inherit the earth kind of shit. Not to get, I mean, I don't buy into that stuff, but that's what like with regards to Christianity. But with leftists, it's true. I mean, like that's why they support the Palestinians, right? Is because they're just like these eternal victims that we can virtue signal for. And that's also how they think of the workers. Like, oh, the workers are so oppressed. They're such victims. Oh, my heart bleeds for the workers. That's not what Marx is about. The reason Marx identifies the proletariat as a revolutionary class is not because they're weak. It's because they're strong. It's because they're the strongest class. They create all the value. They, as the proletarian class, can just sit on their hands and bring the entire world screeching to a halt. That's why they're the revolutionary class. It's not because they're oppressed. It's not because they're getting a raw deal or they're victims or shit like that. This is not about victims. Okay? This is about the proletariat realizing how much power they have. And this whole system of bourgeois economics is set up as an obfuscation to stop workers from realizing how much power they have. No, it's not labor theory of value. You making shit at the factory, that doesn't create value. That doesn't do anything. Value is actually just whatever some rich fuck will pay for it. Whatever they want, they think a pet rock is worth $30. That's what the value is. No. Let me tell you. I could sell you a fucking piece of paper that says you own the Brooklyn Bridge for $100. That doesn't mean that's its value, right? I mean, that's what makes it a scam. You paid more than the value. The value is nothing. Value comes from labor. The whole system of bourgeois economics is designed to do everything it can to hide that fact from the working class, that all value comes from their labor, that all value comes from the working class. They are the revolutionary subject because they hold all the cards and they just don't know it, because the bourgeoisie has this whole fucking media propaganda machine designed to prevent us from knowing it. Okay. Right. Anyway, tangent over.
Right. Well, and no, and it's a good tangent. It leads us into like this turning point in this essay where it does make that clear. Like now that we've gotten all that mumbo jumbo out of the way, just saying, okay, can we get to an economic law, a solid economic law about where value comes from? And if you skip ahead to section 6, value and labor, just laying it out. That value, what value is common to all commodities? It's labor. It's being able to put in the time to take what is in nature and transform it into something that is usable for mankind. That is true for shirts, wheat, cars, lamps, for
everything. Right? Because if you can say, well, this amount of wheat is equal to this amount of, I don't know, Rolexes or whatever, there's something in common there. There has to be some third thing that they can both be expressed in, which is value, which is. Wait, am I skipping ahead?
No, you're not. Because he says, just to go into the relativity here, because he says that the relationship between two commodities themselves is subjective. Like, you can, the value of a car is worth, 10,000 bushels of wheat, but why is it worth 10,000 bushels of wheat? But that same car could also be worth, half of an apartment. Again, so the relationship, or it's worth 10 gold bricks, but like that's arbitrary. The relationship that those commodities have to each other is arbitrary because like someone might value the car more than they value the wheat, and vice versa. But the common equalizing relationship between all of these things is the labor that it takes to produce these things, because we all go through time the same. We all age the same. We all have the same two hands to be able to make this stuff. And that's the social factor that and the physical factor that all of these things have in common. The labor time that it takes to produce these things, which brings us to that like the crux of why these economists, these hucksters and people on CNN who are bringing on like Scott Galloway and all of these magicians, that what they don't want you to know this is because when you have a modern factory worker, when you have these members of of the UAW working for Chrysler or General Motors or Ford, who are like vastly more productive than they were back in like the 19th century, or even back in like the 1970s. We're working more, we're more productive than we've ever been. But wages have been stagnant since the 1970s. Why? We've produced more value, but are not receiving any of that value. Why? It didn't disappear. It didn't just like vanish up in smoke. It's because it's been absorbed by the banks. It's been absorbed by these CEOs who have transformed their salaries from 20 times the amount that the entry-level worker makes to 400 times what they make. That increased value has not been given to the person who has created that value in the first place, has created it with the sweat and blood of his own labor power.
Yeah,
that is the only reason that these people want to hide where value comes from behind all this smoke and mirrors, behind supply and demand, behind all of this jibber jabber. But like, and I wrote this in my notes because it's so funny that we have this example of a United Auto Workers strike and 600 members of a Ford plant fired for arbitrary reasons, when Ford himself, Henry Ford, who invented the production line, who invented the system of increasing production, he was the one who scientifically laid out in terms very similar to Marx. Henry Ford himself, who was not popular with his contemporary capitalists, said that the limit of the price of a commodity is in how efficient its production line is. Like his concept of time, we're speaking of labor time, time is also a flexible thing. It is time is nothing but the distance a commodity travels to its completion. So therefore, if you increase the efficiency that it takes to complete that commodity, to put a car together, if you shorten the production line and make it more efficient, you have saved a whole bunch of time and then made a commodity cheaper, which is why he could make cars affordable to like millions of Americans. Consequently, and this is the crux of the matter. He made the car cheaper, but did wages go down? No, he doubled the American wage single-handedly, doubled it. Cars got cheaper, wages went up.
Yeah, because he
gave more leverage to the American worker. Henry Ford was of a type not seen amongst his contemporaries. They hated him. They hated him for laying this out.
Well, this goes back to the first point where they're assuming that this bowl of soup, right, is a fixed quantity. You only have a certain amount of soup. But what Henry Ford did is he increased the amount of soup just by being more efficient, by developing the forces of production. But I want to point out this paragraph right here, because as I said, I really believe that every right-wing argument against Marxian economics was addressed by Marx. And this right here, how many times have you heard this shit? It might seem that if the value of a commodity is determined by the quantity of labor bestowed upon its production, the lazier a man or the clumsier a man, the more valuable his commodity, because the greater time of labor required for finishing the commodity. This, however, would be a sad mistake. How often do you hear this from the right, right? Like, well, if it's labor theory of value, why can't I poop in my hand for 2 hours and charge 2 hours worth of labor for the poop?
Right? Why
Well,
can't I dig a hole
exactly.
in the middle of the? Why can't I spend 3 years digging a hole in the woods and then
Because
charge someone?
Marx, well, I'll tell you why. Because Marx isn't, I mean, this is this is what bourgeois economists love to do, is they love to talk about, like, they love to individualize it, right? They love to talk about like that Phil Labonte guy did recently, like, oh, you go to the shop and you both say thank you. Yeah, right. But what that's not what Marx is talking about. He's talking about social labor, socially necessary labor time. So pooping in your hand is not socially necessary, okay? Digging a hole is not socially necessary. He's talking about the labor that is required to reproduce our society. You know, make everyone needs food, electricity, clothes, shit like this. This is socially necessary labor. So that's what he's talking about here. And also, you know, if someone's like slower and shittier at it, that's not socially necessary, because if you're applying across the whole society, there's the people who are best at it are the ones who are going to get hired by the capitalist, right? If you're lazy on the fucking shop floor, you're not going to be working for the capitalist for very long. He's going to fire your ass. So he's not talking about like an individual flower shop or whatever, like PragerU likes to talk about. He's talking about the whole of society. Okay, like he's talking about classes. He's not talking about individuals. He's talking about classes. So for the proletarian class, what is the socially necessary labor time? And that's gonna, you know, that because that's how the world works. The world doesn't. Margaret Thatcher was full of shit. The world does not run on individuals. It runs, you know, if you're bad at something, you're not going to get paid to do it. That's just the truth. So it's just ridiculous to bring that up as like a disproof of the labor theory of value, because I mean, it's just so intuitive. Like, yeah, every commodity requires labor. Name one that doesn't. Go ahead. Even if it's a pet rock, somebody's got to go get the rock and package it up, you know, like that. There's no commodity that doesn't require some sort of labor. There's really nothing else that's common across all commodities. And of course, because all commodities can be exchanged for each other, there must be something that's common across all of them, right? So that their value is expressed in each other, or in the exchange value of money. And the only thing that can be is labor. There's nothing else.
And here is
If there's
important.
something else, figure it out and disprove Marx.
Yeah, here's important point number 2 of why these charlatans don't want to uh, use the labor theory of value is because, and this is also why they always use like McDonald's workers, why they don't want to talk about the factory workers. And when they talk about strikes, they'll talk about the writer's strike and not about the auto workers strike. Like intentional mystification or conflation of the two. It is because if your labor power comes from like, yeah, your ability to produce socially necessary things over time, then of course the industrial laborer should be the measurement, like the keystone of labor power in the country, because they can produce infinitely more than a McDonald's worker. They can produce infinitely more value. Like a person working at, you know, in a Ford production line who is uh, who's making these like chassis for a vehicle, or who is even chassis for
Yeah.
uh, I'm a damn it, Jim. I'm a doctor, not a lathe operator.
It means you're fine.
Um,
It means it means you learned it by reading.
but yeah, like someone who makes car parts, even like little screws that are worth fractions of a penny. If you're going through thousands and thousands of those every hour, you are producing more value, more socially necessary value than a McDonald's worker making burgers, and especially more than these parasitic Hollywood writers who are producing no value, who are actually sucking away value from the economy because they produce nothing socially necessary, but it costs us to have it, from the cost of their intellectual property, from the cost of, how much it takes to rent out their offices, and so on. Like all of that of that salary for them is parasitic.
Right.
Which is
This is the
the
barista
keystone.
discourse.
Yeah.
And that's why they conflate the two. Like the comic's not about like the guys slaughtering the cows or the meat packing plant or the truckers who transported it. It's about the glorified prostitute who has to wear a smile while they give you your burger.
The service worker, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, the guy at McDonald's didn't make any of that food. He's just a simple, like any value that labor has is in performing the service for you to like assemble a sandwich that you say now you don't have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and those jobs are awful. Okay, I've worked in service. It's the worst, and nobody should have to do it. It should just be a robot that gives you your damn burger.
Right, the easiest jobs to automate.
Yeah. Oh well, they don't even. I mean, they don't even need to automate them. Like a lot of people will call it automation, like the self checkout. People call the self checkout automation, right? But it's really not. They just flip the cash register around, and they're making you do it. Like they're just offloading labor onto the consumer. But that's how unnecessary these fucking jobs are. It's just because it's a means of control. I mean, not to go full Jehu, but we could be working a hell of a lot less than we do. And that was kind of proved during COVID, wasn't it? Like most people, or I don't know if most, but a lot of people stopped going into work and everything was fine. You could still get food. You could still get clothes, Amazon was still delivering. So like, if you don't need to go into work, why are you working?
And in the interest of time, that is a very good segue. That is a very good segue into the next section, production of surplus value, which again, like everything else in this essay, so no, it's ahead of labor. It's the one after labor power is a production of surplus value.
We talked about labor power.
Yeah, it's the next one. Production of surplus values, which is again, like everything else, very intuitive. It's the value. If the power of labor determines its value, the value of labor is the cost of what it takes to reproduce your own labor power. That's the absolute limit of a wage. How much of your value can you, like how many chassis, is that what it's called for a car?
Chassis.
How many chassis can you produce in order to pay for all of your wage? In this Ford or for this UAW strike, for example, when they're calling for a 40% increase in salaries, such that an entry-level worker would make $80,000 a year. If you divide that by 2,080 hours in a working year, assuming a 40-hour work week, that is works out to slightly less than $40 an hour, about $39 an hour, which to our minds seems like, if you have no context for that number, seems like that's such a high number for a starting wage. But these banksters and parasites will get their panties in a twist because that number seems so high. But when you realize that the individual factory worker produces a lot more than $40 worth of value in an hour's worth of labor time, then they're producing a lot of surplus. All of that surplus goes to the factory owner. $40 is, with as productive as a modern worker is easily, you could easily achieve. A McDonald's worker easily makes that much in terms of like value that they produce. So imagine how much value the factory worker at a Ford plant produces.
Right. This is a very core insight of Marx, and it makes right wingers really mad because they say like, "Oh, the workers are such babies. They all think they're being exploited." But like, if you're being exploited, why do I hate you? Or I don't know what their argument is. But what the thing is, Marx is not making a moral argument here. He's not saying like, "Oh, workers are being exploited because like Upton Sinclair, the jungle, and working conditions are so bad." No, it's a scientific judgment, because he's saying, okay, So if things are sold at their value, which is equilibrium, right, which the bourgeois economists can't explain, but at equilibrium, you have a value. So things are in general going to, the supply and demand is going to tend towards this core value. So if everything's being sold at its value, why are capitalists making profits? How can you be making profits if you're selling everything at its value? And the answer is because they're not. Because when they buy labor power from the worker, they are not pay, they pay a wage, but they're not paying for the full value. So if you get paid for 8 hours of work, it's gonna be like for 4 hours you're producing commodities worth what you got paid, and then for the next 4 hours you're doing unpaid labor, which is going into the pocket of the capitalist. It's not just the capitalist, because this is actually an insight from Adam Smith, which is that profit is divided into 3 parts. This is what Adam Smith wrote in Wealth of Nations. I mean, they love to use Adam Smith as like the capitalist daddy. None of them ever fucking read him, though, because he's way more like Marx than he is like them. So for Adam Smith, you've got the profit is divided into 3 parts: wages, profit for the capitalist, and then rent and interest. Because most capitalists are either going to be paying a landlord for their factory or whatever it is, and then they probably took out a loan from a bank to start their business, and they're going to have to pay interest on that. And for Smith, these 3 groups are going to be at loggerheads because they all want to take as much of the profit as they can. Marx treats it a little differently, which I'm not sure if that's in this section or the next section. I'll just talk about it anyway. For Marx, he has a class analysis, which is that the money lender who's getting the interest and or the landlord, I mean, it's often going to be the same because BlackRock owns like shitloads of property, and the industrial capitalist who's paying underpaying the worker for his wages, they're both bourgeoisie. So they're not going to be, I mean, it's a secondary contradiction, but they're not going to be at each other the same way the capitalists and the proletariat broadly, because neither the landlord / moneylender or the industrial capitalists are actually producing the value. All the value comes from the worker, right? So both of them have an interest in keeping this whole situation going because they're not producing value. They're leeching the value off the worker. And as much as there is, it's important to understand this contradiction between finance capital, industrial capital. And that's pretty much what our politics is, by the way. Pretty much all politics is the contradiction because workers don't have a seat at the table. It's the contradiction between finance and industrial. But the more important contradiction, which is papered over by our Democrat versus Republican political system, is the contradiction between the whole bourgeoisie, industrial and finance, and the worker, who are the ones getting exploited, again, not morally, but objectively, to produce all the profit, all the surplus value for the bourgeoisie, which is a parasite class. Okay.
Right.
They aren't producing value at all. If I buy a factory and it just sits there, it's a waste of money. You need people to come in and work to make you value. And if you pay them as much as they're producing, you're not going to make any profit. Like, again, this shit's very intuitive. It's really not like that complicated.
Which is why you have to, which is why you have to not really pay attention to people in Congress or these like business gurus, because they will make you stupider if you listen to them. It's no coincidence that this, that as the strike is going on, you have congressmen like Ro Khanna, who is congressman over the district of Silicon Valley, one of the least productive, most parasitic areas in the country. He said on the All In Summit, like the video of like all these different venture capitalists, tech gurus, investors, bankers, just these parasite people who produce nothing and who have increased inflation and destroyed industry. Ro Khanna is saying that he said in this video that most of economic value in the country comes from like tech and finance. He said this.
That's crazy.
So like just mystifying this relationship to like who produces all of the like I can't eat finance. If you want to talk about like socially necessary labor, I can't eat an app. I can't like yeah, that's cool to have, but in terms of like value, even like all of the and all of the labor if labor does go into an app, it's all research and development. It's not even like physical labor. So like once an app is produced, it could essentially be free because all the labor that went into it is already done. And this is and so like all of the value has already been produced once the app is finished. It's just the process of like maintaining the servers and doing customer support. It's all of this. It's all this arbitrary price that's been added onto it. Like you were saying with that, Adam Smith saying that like or what like the landlord needs his cut. It's just adding more and more cut for the banker and the landlord. But that's what they'll have you believe. That's where value comes from. It's because like these things getting more expensive is and so GDP can go up, so that these investors who can do stock buybacks for their so that they can get nice bonuses for Christmas, like they're the ones creating value. No, they're creating increased rent. That's all they're doing. That's all they're doing. We can't let them mystify that. The real the real meat and potatoes value comes from industrial labor primarily, and then general labor secondarily.
I want to make an analogy here because I've been reading this, but whenever I'm reading, I want to tie in what I'm reading to what we're talking about. And what I've been reading lately is Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, which is about Mount Everest. And the thing that really stands out to me about Mount Everest and like how it's been sort of commercialized is that when people go on Mount Everest expeditions, they the Sherpas do fucking everything. Okay. They pay these Sherpas who were born there and are way more acclimatized to the low oxygen, and they do everything. They carry like 80-pound bags up the mountain. They lay all the ropes and shit. They make the path, and they make the base camp, and they do all the shit. They carry food up. They're like climbing back and forth all the time, carrying food up there. But they get paid like nothing. They get paid like a tenth as much as like these celebrity guides. And this is when I was reading this, it's just like it's really a metaphor for the working class as a whole. Like without the Sherpas, nobody's climbing Everest. But the people who get all the fanfare and get all the credit are the people who just, climb up based on their labor. And that's our capitalist class.
Or in that analogy, it would be more like the Sherpas do all of the work climbing Mount Everest, and then these congressmen and these tech workers and bankers have a drone that follows the Sherpa up the mountain. And they're just like in an air-conditioned office sipping a mojito, and then the drone following the Sherpa is getting all this amazing footage, and then they'll take credit. They'll use intellectual property to take credit for the Sherpa's work, so that they themselves climbed Mount Everest because they got footage of it.
That's pretty much how it is, dude. Like, yeah, the people who get to the top, they don't, they never thank the Sherpas when they go do interviews later. They say, yeah. And that's how it is. I mean, that's how every part of our economy is. The people who are doing all the work, they just like, it's like take it for granted, And all right, wait, I want to,
we're almost done, so we can go on some tangents here.
Wait, I wanted to, yeah, sorry. It just seems so, maybe that wasn't worth going on, but it seems so relevant to what we're talking about. This is my favorite.
The more metaphors we have on our disposal to make it easily digestible for people so that they have the words to describe, I think it's valuable.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, that's what it is. The working class of the Sherpas who are just like low key doing everything, getting paid a tenth as much and getting no credit. And people are like, oh, some new British guy like climbed the mountain. Well, no, he got dragged up by a fucking Sherpa, but nobody even knows the Sherpa's name. Anyway, this is my favorite paragraph in the whole essay because he's talking about slavery versus wage labor. And the difference is when a slave works, they are also spending some part of their workday to reproduce their existence, right? Because the master is going to give them a room and food and all the things they need to survive. And the same thing happens with a worker. The worker is working for some amount of the day to make what they need, like what the value is, and then they're working more. But the difference is, for a slave, it appears as though all their work is unpaid, even though some of it is paid because they're getting paid in room and board. Whereas for the wage labor, it appears as though their whole day is paid when it's really not. And it's really not that much different from the slave, right? Because they're doing, like, theoretically, they're doing half their day to get paid, and then they're doing half for free. And that's also what a slave does. But it's just, the difference is really just formal, And this is where the idea of wage slavery comes from. Like, a lot of workers out here, if not most workers, are just making enough to get room and board. Well, that's what a slave did, right? A slave works to get room and board. Well, that's what a worker does also. And the difference is really just like
just to name
in
the
the
formal
appearance
difference.
of it.
Just to name the formal difference, it's that the formal difference is that the slave owner owns the body of the slave, the factory owner owns your time. They might not own your physical body, but they own all of your time. And so everything that you produce on their time belongs to them, and that is the distinction between private property and personal property. Is that everything that belongs to private property is purely alienate, like purely just this means of enslaving you, so that everything that is yours by rights because you made it belongs to someone else just because they said so, because they have a gun pointed at your head.
Yeah, or the state has a gun pointed at your head on their behalf. Okay, we talked about this. They make profit by selling a commodity at its value.
Yep, and that's pretty intuitive.
Again, underpaying for labor.
And then just to the quick point I wanted to say. The quick point I wanted to say about that is just that profit is made by selling a commodity at its value, not by overselling it, not by increasing the price. This is what the fall in the rate of profit is. Like the decision to increase price is arbitrary because it's just that a factory owner like at Ford wants to avoid a fall in the rate of profit. Is that ratio changes of how much profit they're taking in. They're still taking in profit. They're still making money, a lot of it. They just want to maximize the amount of profit they're making so that it's a disgusting amount rather than just, because profits for the sake of profits. That's what the system is.
Well, they can't sell it above its value because they're competing with other capitalists.
Exactly.
But what they can buy under its value is labor power, because they're not dealing with other capitalists, they're dealing with workers. Exactly. And there's just a massive power imbalance there because, if a worker loses his job, he's going to starve. Whereas the worst thing that can happen to the capitalist is that he becomes a worker. Right.
Which brings us to the final two sections of this essay. 13, the different parts into which.
Yeah, I talked about this.
Yeah. Sorry. The
I talked 13, about that.
Section 13, which is main cases of attempts at raising wages or resisting their fall, which is just.
Oh, this is an important point. Yeah.
Yeah, which is simply put is just a list of the ways that that private industry and finance, the means that they use of disciplining labor, of inflicting class warfare, which, to name them briefly, are increasing productivity without increasing wages, so making you work harder for no extra money, changing the prices of commodities or your wage, so either which are both inflationary, so either increasing the cost of everything that you're paying for, like eggs, gas, or decreasing your wage. Effectively, those two are the same thing. So inflation is a means of class warfare. And
that's a really important one too, because right now with the UAW strike, they're not actually asking for an increase in wages. They are trying to maintain their wages at what they are, because thanks to Bidenflation, their wages have gone down. right? So they're not actually asking for an increase. They're fighting to keep their wages at what they are. And the way the media always frames it is that it's like, oh, the greedy unions want more. Their wages have already gone down due to inflation. They're just trying to maintain them. And that's a
Right.
really important point.
Right. Putting onus, putting blame for destroying the economy on workers for having reasonable demands, and not putting blame on destroying the economy for the stock owning parasites who inflated the price of everything. Good point. And then the last means of disciplining labor, and there are more. These are just three broad ones. Is increasing the time you spend in a working day. So even if you're working like with the same level of intensity, just making you work longer hours, or having your entire life revolve around work for no extra pay. So like commuting, or or like taking all of your work home with you to be able to like meet your quota. So just taking out more and more of your time.
Yeah, and the capitalist wants the working day to be as long as possible because he's only paying you like you say 4 hours. You spend 4 hours to make the value that you're getting paid, and then everything beyond that is surplus value.
So
So
that's
if the capitalist can do what he wants, he's going to give you a 14-hour day as much as he wants because it's all surplus value for him, right? And you mentioned this at the beginning. The working day is going to be as long as it can possibly be, and the only reason we don't work fucking 14-hour days is because of union action in the past.
And this is how Marx describes unions is as guerrilla warriors in the struggle to resist the fall of labor power, to resist the fall of like the price of labor power. Um, they like to resist these disciplinary measures. These strikers aren't asking for anything unreasonable. They aren't asking for anything impossible. Like all of these demands can be met. They've been met before. They will be met again because development must be made by any means necessary. Like human beings will develop. That's just a natural law of history. But like the speed and effectiveness of this development is determined by the power of labor. So like supporting these guerrilla warriors in the class warfare is like that's how urgent it is, like to get ourselves out of this century of humiliation that we've been living in since.
True.
To get ourselves out of the century of humiliation, we should be supporting these strikers wholeheartedly.
We are in a century of humiliation. That's such a good point.
We should be increasing their demands. We should like their demands are way too modest. We should be getting them more than what they're asking for. God damn it. Because these which and yeah, so the we all know how much. I don't think we need to go too much into that penultimate section because we know how much it sucks to work in America. We're working harder than we ever have for less money than we've ever made, and that's by design. It's because the systematic attack on unionization and labor power has, it's nothing new. Biden is merely the latest attempt at the state to make it illegal to strike, to use your leverage as a worker in this country to fight for your rights, to get the full value of your labor. But the last point in this essay is like the shortcoming of labor unions. Labor unions are an important means of building consciousness as a worker, but fundamentally, the conclusion that Marx reaches is that, so he's dispelled all of this mumbo jumbo that prices are not determined by wages, and that labor unions are important for keeping the gains made by the worker, but they do not change that fundamental relationship that the worker has to the system of private industry, to capitalism, which alienates everything that they make and just gives it over to the banks. the struggle between capital and labor and its results, is what the class war is. A class war that the working class did not start. We did not instigate this class war. It was not the workers who attacked the Ford plant owners. It wasn't us who attacked the Fed for printing money until it was worthless. No, it was the Fed attacking us by turning on the money printers and printing $3 trillion, making everything twice as expensive as it was just a few years ago. It was the factory owners who attacked the workers, firing 600 laborers in one plant alone, because and justifying it, saying that, oh, we could go bankrupt, we could lose all of our profits, which is clearly, as we've laid out, not true. The class war has always been instigated by the ruling class, and the result.
Well, I wouldn't say it's instigated by the ruling class as much as like it just materially exists. I mean, profit is necessarily going to be split between labor and capital, and they're just inherently at odds just based on filling their material needs. And it's not about like, oh, the capitalists are evil and they're nasty. I mean, they make it easy, right, with their like Satan worshiping, adrenochrome drinking shit. But that's really not what it's about. What it's about is it's just our interests as classes are fundamentally at odds. What's good for labor is bad for capital and vice versa. And right now in this country, the war is very one-sided because the unions are mostly captured. I mean, there was this new guy, you might have talked about this yesterday, who just got elected last spring at UAW. And he's the first guy who's been elected in a while because what they've been doing is just naming their successors, and it's just more shills. But this guy was actually elected by the workers directly, and now he's doing a strike. So it's a good sign. I mean, taking back the unions is a really important step because it's the only working class power there is, everything else can be bought up by capital, the media and the think tanks and the politicians. All this shit is going to answer to capital. The only thing that can actually represent labor is unions. Like, really. You can't trust fucking politicians to represent labor in this system because they're like AOC. She's going to get bought off, right? And it's over. If she wasn't up from the beginning. Whereas a union doesn't draw its power from capital, it draws it from labor. So it can be corrupted by capital, but at the end of the day, it's corrupting the power of labor. It's not power that comes from capital, like all these other things I listed.
Right, and that's the ultimate conclusion here. That is, if the final conclusion of the essay is that labor unions are an important means of class consciousness and also of keeping the gains that labor makes, but that they just are limited in changing the system, I would modify what you said is that you can't trust politicians. I would say that the reason we can't trust politicians is because the only politicians we have that represent labor are just like these corporate shills. That's why we need a Marxist-Leninist party in this country that actually like fights for the working class, that fights for the laborer, that is seeking to change.
Let me tell you, if there was a Marxist-Leninist party, you'd see how rigged shit actually is.
Right.
You think 2020
power.
You think 2020 was safe and effective. You have no idea how blatantly they would rig shit. If there was an authentic working class party, that it would be right out in the open. Anyway. That's what we need to wake people up.
It's what we need. So we got to build it.
To how fucking rigged this system is.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all for tuning in to our very first theory stream here at the Barracks. We're going to be making this into a series. This is how frequently that series happens is dependent on you. You got to share it out. You got to make sure that people know about this. You got to do the reading. We're going to make y'all read today. So we'll announce what the next reading in the series will be within the next few days. Keep an eye out for that. We're going to make a playlist here on the channel, which is why you got to make sure to tell people to follow the Barracks on YouTube, follow the Barracks on X.
That's an important thing I want to highlight is that we went through this pretty detailed, but there's really no substitute for reading. You can listen to as many podcasts as you want, as many streams, read as many tweets, but there's no substitute for actually going and doing the reading. It's just the way your brain works when you're reading this shit versus just listening to people talk about it. You got to go do the reading. And it's really important because we don't just want fans here, right? We don't just want people who tune in. Like, I know we didn't get the kind of viewers we get when we're dunking on Cornell West, but at the end of the day, I don't want an audience of just like fans who just tune in to watch us crack jokes and dunk on people. I want fucking cadres. So you got to do the work to actually understand this shit, actually understand how our economy works, what Marx's core insights were. It's the most important thing. This is what separates communists from other political parties. Other political parties are just fucking fandoms, all right? The libertarians are a fandom, okay? DSA is a fandom. But here, we don't want to be a fandom. We want to actually gather the insights from communists in the past, and we're doing, just classical Marxist texts right now. I would love to move on to more recent stuff too. That's what separates the real, authentic communist working class movement from all these bourgeois political parties, which come in every fucking flavor. But at the end of the day, they're all going to sell you out because they are ignoring these core insights. They're ignoring how our economy actually works because they are just in it for themselves. They're in it for their own political power or their own economic gain. And if you want to do that, you got to reject this shit. You got to reject the labor theory of value because you're trying to get in on the fucking action. You want to siphon off some of this surplus value for yourself. And that's not what communists want to do, okay? We're not here to join in on the fucking parasite feast, okay? We want to actually make fundamental changes. We want to actually overthrow this system and put workers in power. And that's why communism is the only answer, because we're the only people who are going to go deep dive into how our economic system actually functions and expose it for what it is, which is a fucking scam, okay? That's really the core insight of Marx, is that this shit is a scam. And all these bourgeois economists, all these bourgeois politicians, their job is to disguise the fact that it's a scam. Fundamentally, that's what it is. So we're going to do theory streams on the Barracks here because this is what we need to do as cadres. Is we need to really understand the meat and potatoes. We need to understand the key insights. We need to understand how this economy works, and we need to understand what our real goals are here. Our goals aren't just to be put in power. Our goals aren't just to replace the bourgeois politicians who are like 80 and dying with some 50-year-old ghouls, like younger ghouls. That's not what we want. We want to overthrow this whole system. And the first step is know thy enemy, know how the system actually works. And that's what the purpose of theory is. So I don't care if we get one viewer, we're going to keep doing these streams because this is really important. Anyway.
There you have it, folks. Clip it. Wrap it up. Put a bow on it.
Yeah.
That was a hell of a statement. When we're looking for little clips to make episodes of the Barracks, it is just magic moments like that just make it so easy. We appreciate you, Milkman. I couldn't come up with better closing statements if I tried. So let's not belabor this stream anymore. We gave y'all your assignments. For now, that's all we got. We're out.